Welcome into the Andrew Garrison Show. My name is Andrew Garrison. This is episode 17. We're here to discuss a few topics across the sports world. It's going to be a little bit more of an opinionated episode of the Andrew Garrison Show this time around. I have three things I want to say. We're going to talk about Indiana football and I guess you could say expectations for the 2026 season. Not as if I'm expecting Indiana to do what I'm about to say, but it's sort of what I would say and where I would stand when it comes to the outlook on Indiana's 2026 season and how people, in my opinion, should be viewing their prowess, their strength, their capability of contending, their ability to win a championship, win back-to-back national championships in 2026. Then in the second segment, we're going to talk about USA out of the World Cup, but I'm in on international soccer. That's sort of my takeaway from these last couple of weeks. I wanted to save that for when the USA went out of the World Cup, which of course happened last night with a 4-1 loss to Belgium. A few days ago, I discussed the World Cup with Campbell Manahan. I recommend you go back and check that out. A lot of it's outdated. We talked a lot about sort of previewing the USA-Belgium matchup, talked a little bit more about title contenders and things like that. I'm trying to get into this World Cup as much as I possibly can because I'm now in on international soccer, and this is, of course, the chief international soccer competition. So we'll discuss that, sort of what I've learned about myself during this World Cup and how I think I might be paying attention to international soccer moving forward. And then in the last segment, we're going to do something a little bit more fun and a little bit less timely, a little bit more evergreen, I guess you could say, and talk about Mickey Mouse Championships and why I think they don't exist. It doesn't need as much more elaboration until we get to that point at the end of the show. But until then, I want to discuss the World Cup. I want to discuss international soccer. I want to discuss Indiana football. We'll start with Indiana football. The drink of choice today is a lemon lime Waterloo. My family, I'm here at my parents' house. My family has a ton of different sparkling waters, a couple different brands, but most importantly, a ton of different flavors. And I like to, when I do podcasts, just have one. It's just comfortable to have like a sparkling water there to just sip throughout the episode. And it's a whole lot easier when I have a guest, because then when my guest is talking, that's my moment to kind of take a break. I can take a deep breath. I can catch my breath. I can take a sip of my sparkling water. But this time I'm alone. I don't have Campbell with me. Noah Bedoris, who I did the City League podcast with a couple days ago as well. Check out the City League podcast, by the way. It's my internship here over the summer, the City League. It's a great semi-pro basketball league in Indianapolis. But nonetheless, did the episode with him because he was there on Wednesday and I wasn't. And I had that drink to just kind of, lean on. And I'm really interested to see if the ice melts before I have a couple ice cubes in here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see. I want to see if they melt and if, it's more watered down by the end of this episode, because I'm going to be talking the whole time. I got to hold up the whole podcast all on my own. Just an interesting side plot, I guess, for episode 17 of the Andrew Garrison Show. But nonetheless, I want to discuss Indiana football and sort of my view of, my outlook on this team moving forward, this program perhaps moving into 2026, because I have what I would describe as a dissenting opinion from pretty much the general public in college football, right? Now, I have a different perception. First of all, because I cover the team. I'm a student reporter for the Hoosier Network, covering Indiana football. That started in the spring. So I didn't cover this team during the national championship run. I was in a couple press conferences just, with my role at WIUX, as a spotter and a reporter, freshman in college at that time. So just kind of getting my feet wet. And so I had, after the Indiana State game, I was there for the player media availability, Saul Fernando, saw Omar Cooper Jr., I believe Tyreek Tucker, if I remember correctly. And so, a couple players there. And for the most part, I was just watching as a fan, though, just kind of a college football fan, watching along, observing. Again, was in the studio for the Rose Bowl, was in the studio for WIUX student radio for a couple different games, and, on site for the Indiana State game for WIUX. But for the most part, I was just watching as a fan from the outside. And then this spring that shifted. All of a sudden I was at spring practices, and now, obviously we'll be covering the team fully this season. So there's that aspect of kind of my skewed perception a little bit. And also, of course, the fact that I'm a student in Indiana University. So I hear what Indiana students are saying, and I hear what Indiana alumni are saying more than anything else. Obviously, with social media and the internet, I have an idea of I have a pretty good idea. I feel like I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of what the college football public is saying, just because that's, part of my job. That's what I'm aware of. That's what I pay attention to in this life. But more than anything, in person with my actual physical ears, I'm speaking with, interacting with IU students a lot, all the time. And it seems like across my experiences with those people and, the IU students and just across the board, it seems like the general idea is that Indiana is going to take a step back in 2026, which is a totally understandable thing to say. And I want to preface, before I kind of go in on what I think about this situation, I want to preface by saying that obviously I'm aware that it's July 7th right now, and every opinion is a valid one on July 7th, right? If you said Indiana is going to go 0-12, I'd probably pretty vehemently disagree with you. And if you really believed it, I disagree with you even more. But it's not it is kind of outrageous, but it's not truly unbelievable and unthinkable that could happen because they haven't played any games yet, right? We really have no idea how this season is going to go. That's a bit of an extreme example, but you get the point, right? If you're going to say Indiana is going to miss the playoff in 2026, I'm not going to call you crazy. I'm not going to call you silly or anything like that. Any prediction is just that, a prediction, even if I think mine is a little bit more educated than anyone else's. Now, regardless, the general public seems to think that Indiana is going to take a step back in 2026. Totally reasonable. They just won the national championship. It's extremely difficult to win the national championship twice. Obviously, Indiana did that and then lost a ton of key players, including the quarterback, who was the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, and plenty of other first-round draft picks and NFL players across the board who are now in the pros, and then restocked that with, the number 8 transfer portal class in 2026, but not the best, right? So it's not like Indiana, even though they won the championships this past season, it's not like Indiana is far and away above everyone else in every other category. Indiana is just another championship contender, another strong team, another top 25 team entering 2026, even though it has the 2025 championship to its name. So 100% reasonable, 100% logically sound to say that Indiana is not going to win the national championship again. That's obviously not outrageous. Now, where I land on this is I held that exact same opinion a year ago. Indiana 2 years ago, obviously, lost a couple games, but found their way into the playoff, lost in the first round to Notre Dame on the road, won all their games except for a road loss to Ohio State in the regular season, and then the road loss to Notre Dame in the playoff. Those two teams ended up meeting in the national championship, and Ohio State won the national championship that year. That would have been 2024, or if you call it, I call it the 2024 season because the bulk of the college football season actually occurred in 2024, even though the championship game was held in 2025. Nonetheless, the argument there was that maybe Indiana is a fluke team. Maybe this was a great season, a great start, but you have a relatively not overly difficult schedule. Michigan didn't turn out to be much of what Michigan normally is, especially the Michigan team that won the national championship very recently. And you lose to Ohio State, you lose to Notre Dame. Both times you play an actually truly difficult team on the road, just get demolished. So maybe Indiana isn't all that we think they are. And that's kind of where I landed in between the 2024 and 2025 seasons, where I thought, sure, they made the playoff, but I don't think they would again. When I looked at the schedule last year, I said to people, not on a podcast, I don't think publicly, but I could name the people that I said this to. I thought that Indiana would go 10-2 or 9-3. I thought Oregon and Penn State were auto losses. I thought having Illinois at home was a big, big deal, and that Indiana would probably win that game, and that we would probably have a lot of, hype and intrigue and interest, and making the playoff would just ultimately come down to whether or not the SEC imploded upon itself, and all the SEC teams took each other out quite in the same way, to where an Indiana team that would have gone 10-2, lost to the two true bona fide playoff teams who, by the way, were in the Big Ten championship game the year before, Penn State and Oregon, lose to those two teams. Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, they're all in the playoff. We'll see who else. Maybe Indiana can sneak in as a 4th or a 5th, but if they do, it's going to be a similar story to the year before, where they don't exactly make much noise after that. That's where I landed on Indiana. I was aware that Fernando Mendoza was coming in. I was aware of how much was coming back from the team from the year prior. I was aware of what the supplemental aspects of the transfer portal class were going to do. Aware of Fernando Mendoza, but I still just thought that this Indiana team wasn't where we all thought it was, or where we thought it was going to be based on what happened in 2024. And then I was wrong, right? And then we saw that entire season play out, and we saw just little by little, game after game. I was there in attendance in the student section when Indiana destroyed Illinois, which was a great environment, a ton of fun, a lifelong memory for sure. And over the course of that season, game after game, moment after moment, you're beginning to realize, wait a second, maybe this could be a real thing. And then all of a sudden they become ranked number 1 in the country. And then you have the realization with the Penn State game that this might be a team of destiny. And it turned out to be exactly that, a team of destiny. Team of destiny meaning, kind of like what's going on with Argentina in the World Cup right now, where you have that comeback win over Cape Verde. or Cabo Verde, and then you have the comeback win just now against Egypt. That I'm recording this podcast just minutes after that game. That's what I was just watching, and it's just no matter what happens in the world, no matter who they're going to face, this team's just going to prance its way to the championship and win the title because that's just what destiny and fate has decided. That's what Indiana turned out to feel like, and that's how some of us were probably describing that team after the Penn State game, after the Iowa game, everything else. And I think I learned my lesson with the Penn State matchup, where on one hand, if you hate Indiana, right? If you're just a person out there who hates Indiana, hates Bloomington, maybe you're a Purdue fan, whatever it might be, and you are entering this season and looking for reasons to doubt Indiana and believe that they're just, it's a fake championship, it's a fluke of a year, they're not going to be able to hold this up and be a strong program, they were just a strong team for 1 year. If you want to say that, one of the ways that you could evidence that opinion, one of the ways you could hold up that opinion is look back and say, look, they almost lost to Iowa. They almost lost to Penn State. Sure, they beat Oregon. Sure, they beat Ohio State. Sure, they won all these playoff games. By the way, played a 10 seed in the national championship game. You can construct an argument if you want to for why Indiana's run last season, the 16-0 championship run, isn't as impressive as maybe the 16-0 national championship run looks on paper. But in my opinion, that only just upholds the idea that Curt Cignetti might never lose at anything again in his life, right? The Penn State game, the Iowa game, sure, Indiana beat Oregon, right? Indiana beat Illinois by a lot. This team can win the big games, but even when there's an upset waiting to happen and there's, an expose waiting to occur regarding whether or not this team is fraudulent or not, even when Iowa has this team on the ropes and does everything right defensively and, really truly stymies and slows down this Indiana offense and really has an opportunity to steal it. And I know there were some quarterback injury situations with that game. I remember that game very well. But still, even when Iowa is that close, Fernando Mendoza and the Indiana offense still broke through. Even when Penn State is just by every margin and by every metric should be winning that game, Indiana still found a way to pull through, and it doesn't matter what could possibly... That's the team of destiny aspect to this, right? It doesn't matter what could possibly happen, what the circumstances could possibly be. This Indiana team is always going to find a way to win, and that's what happened throughout the season. Everyone knows that. That doesn't need to be reiterated. It's a 16-0 national championship run, but my argument is, what's to say that is stopping at the national championship? What's to say a team of destiny? What's to say a championship run, that 16-0, just, run of perfection, that streak of perfection? What's to say that stops in Miami when Indiana wins the national championship? Because what we all know about college football is the real faces of college football, the real, the leading voices in college football, the leading most influential forces in college football aren't the players like maybe in the NFL, but they're the coaches, right? It's Nick Saban, it's Kirby Smart, it's Curt Cignetti. And so my argument would simply be to, after the Penn State game, just to have, this is how I felt. That's when it turned for me. That's when I was like, okay, I'm never picking this team to lose again. Because I thought this Illinois game was a much bigger deal than it was at the time, and it was the biggest deal in the world at the time. But at the time, I thought that was a much more significant win because of my opinion of Illinois and because of my opinion of Indiana. And then also, you move forward into the Oregon game, where I thought Indiana would lose that one very reasonably. The Penn State game I thought was potentially tricky, and obviously it proved to be exactly that over the course of the game. When Fernando Mendoza threw an interception against Iowa, I thought it was over. When he threw one against Oregon, I thought it was over. And just, again, time and time again, continuing to prove me wrong. And the Penn State game was the last straw for me, where I said, I'm not picking this team to lose again, no matter who this team plays, right? So the Ohio State game, neutral site, but obviously a little bit closer to Bloomington. Doesn't really matter. Truly a neutral site environment, in my opinion. I wasn't there, but by my estimation, it was to some degree a neutral site game. There at Lucas Oil Stadium, Indiana wins, beat Alabama, beat Oregon a second time, and then go beat Miami. And some people, they have that college football offseason. There's a wall. It partitions 2025-26 from 2026-27, and Indiana's just another contender. For me, they're still that top of the mountain team because Curt Cignetti's still there. And again, I don't have evidence that Curt Cignetti's going to lose again at anything in his life. And that obviously, most importantly, pertains to the football field for the purposes of this conversation. And so over the course of the next season, that makes again, I'm not expecting Indiana to go 16-0 in the national championship, but I'm absolutely going to, if you're asking me to make a prediction, That's the prediction for me, because I don't have evidence that this team is ever going to lose. And again, that didn't stop for me when this team won a championship, because the important piece, and obviously, as we all know, the important differentiator between Indiana of the past and the Indiana of now is Curt Cignetti. And also, I do have the evidence of the number 8 transfer class in the country in 2026 existing in Bloomington. I have seen those transfers in Nick Marsh and, whoever else you want to potentially, pull out and take a look at. I have evidence that Charlie Becker is returning. I have evidence that Josh Hoover is coming in. And while he's not expected to be as great as Fernando Mendoza, we didn't expect Fernando Mendoza to end up being the number 1 overall pick and the Heisman Trophy winner. I remember a CBS Sports mock draft at the very beginning of the season, like just maybe I think the week of the Old Dominion game last year. And Fernando was number 1 to the Browns. And that was a little bit surprising and shocking at the time. And, I don't know who made the mock draft. I'd love to find out. I'm sure there's like one main leading guy at CBS Sports that's his thing, the NFL mock drafts. But I saw Fernando Mendoza at number 1, and that was really jarring, and it was a big talking point across, campus for a couple days there. And that came to fruition, but the point is that was kind of a surprise. That was kind of a shock. So I agree. I don't think Josh Hoover is going to become Fernando Mendoza, but we don't know. There's no telling where his ceiling is, because Fernando Mendoza's perceived ceiling in our minds was completely shattered and broken through over the course of that season. He ends up winning the Heisman Trophy. He ends up being the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, and I'm very excited to see him play for the Raiders this fall. But nonetheless, I have evidence of a great transfer class. I have evidence of a great, return. I have evidence of elevated freshman recruiting, right? Bringing in blue chip guys. Montrezl Sales very possibly could commit to IU. We haven't seen that actually happen yet, and obviously that's something for the future. But Curt Cignetti as the centerpiece tells me, and it just, again, across the board, obviously, tells me that Indiana is going to stay towards the top and remain one of those top-tier contenders in the Big Ten and beyond forever, really. But for me, it's just the fact that 16-0 team in destiny national championship run, and no matter where you decided that was real, that was something that was actually going to happen, whether it was the Penn State game, the Iowa game, for some people the very beginning of the season, week 1 with the Old Dominion win, or for those of you that just didn't quite believe until it actually happened against Miami in the national championship game, I simply believe that doesn't stop. There's no partition between, in the context of this conversation, there's no partition between 2025 and 2026. My belief that Indiana's never going to lose again until I see it. Like, I have to see it to believe it, to say that Curt Cignetti is going to lose again at anything in his life, and therefore Indiana football is going to lose again forever. As long as Curt Cignetti's there, I have no evidence that that's going to happen. And when I see it happen, we'll have a different conversation. But that becomes my most fascinating storyline in 2026 for college football across the board. Obviously, I'm biased there because I cover IU and I'm a student at IU. But if Indiana loses this season, which, based on the general public's thought process on where Indiana is going to be, it would make sense that Indiana could lose to Ohio State, lose to Michigan, lose to Nebraska, lose elsewhere on the schedule, or go undefeated and then lose in the Big Ten championship game, or just do anything other than win the national championship with an undefeated season, which is obviously extremely difficult to do. If anything other than that happens, then Indiana would obviously have to lose a game over the course of the season, and that becomes my most fascinating storyline, because who did it happen? Because, again, I can't imagine it. I can't imagine how that would happen, why that would happen, and obviously when I say that, I'm thinking about the 2025 team, and we haven't seen the 2026 team yet against, another team. We obviously had the spring game, had a couple practices, but for the most part, we don't know how this team is. And obviously my memory of Indiana football, my perception of Indiana football is going to shift, at least in game action. My memory of this team in game action is going to shift as soon as we see them against North Texas on September 5th, and then, against Howard and Western Kentucky, and on we go from there. It's all going to, it'll all update with the 2026 team stuff. But for the moment, I can't imagine what a loss would look like, especially considering that this team is Ohio State at home, especially considering that we don't know what Michigan is, same with Nebraska, etc. And obviously there are a lot of great teams out there, and there are plenty of teams, obviously, that are going to be capable of knocking off Indiana and preventing Indiana from winning 2 national championships in a row, which would be a phenomenal accomplishment. But at this point, that's not going to be a surprise for me. And although I'm not saying it's an expectation in the sense that, like, I would be, if I were an Indiana fan, I would be disappointed by them not winning the national championship again, but that is what I would predict. That's what I would project. If you asked me, that's what I would have to respond with. It's another Indiana undefeated national championship run, because I just have to see a loss to believe it. And again, who does that loss happen against? How does it happen? Why does it happen? What sequence of events led to that happening? As long as the team is healthy, that is the most fascinating storyline that I could ever possibly think of for this season. And again, I got a little bit of bias there because I'm most closely connected to this Indiana team. But if this team loses at all at any point for any reason, I can't wait to delve into how it happened, why it happened, when it happened, to whom it happened against, right? All of those questions are going to just probably be stuck in my brain forever, or at least for the foreseeable future. And if that does happen this season, especially during the regular season, I could imagine myself rewatching that game time and time again, just looking to see how it happened. How did someone find a way to beat Cignetti? Year one, his ramp-up year, was 11-2, if I remember correctly. And then the follow-up year was 16-0. Is this the next year 16-0 as well, or is it perhaps 15-1, or whatever it may be? Where do those losses come? To whom do they happen against? When does it happen? How does it happen? Why does it happen? That's the storyline that fascinates me the most. And again, I'm a neutral observer, right? Because I report on the team, I cover the team, I write about the team, I podcast about the team. Although it's a student reporter job, it's still a job. Like, I'm a neutral observer. I'm not a fan, but secretly, I kind of hope this happens. I kind of hope that this Indiana team loses at some point in the regular season, just so I can have that experience of trying to figure out how and why and when and where and to whom, and all of those questions could be answered and potentially worked through in a million different, columns and articles and sidebars and recaps and podcasts and whatever else. And just that entire conversation, that conversation ecosystem is an experience that I would kind of like to have. And so for that reason, like, part of me in the back of my mind kind of hopes that this team faces some level of adversity, even though I'm not rooting for or against this team, right? I'm just my own personal opinions, my own personal hopes and desires and drives. I want the experience of figuring out what happens after this team loses, and I'm interested to see if that actually happens, because again, I don't think it will. If you're asking me right now, I don't think this team will ever lose again, as long as Curt Cignetti is there, and that's obviously not going to happen. It's obviously not the case, but it's just what I have to say, because I swore after the Penn State game that I was not going to bet against or pick against this Indiana team ever again. They won the national championship. They won 16-0. They went 16-0 over the course of the season. I was right to say that and it's not like that was an uncommon opinion or a rare idea, but I was right to say that I was never going to pick against this team ever again. And now I'm just saying that's not stopping. It didn't stop with the national championship. It'll keep going forever and ever and ever until this team does lose, and then we could reevaluate. But until then, this Indiana team's going 16-0 and winning a national championship. In my mind, that's just the way I see it, and that's the way I'm just what I'm interested in. That's what I'm just so excited about the thought of this team potentially facing some adversity and losing, because last year, just no matter what happened, you could go back and paint, if Indiana lost to Iowa, I could go back right now and paint the picture of how it happened, right? What went wrong? What matchups didn't quite work right for Indiana? Which position groups kind of lagged behind the rest in terms of performance in that game? Could do the same thing with Penn State, can do the same thing with even Ohio State, right? We can look back at any of those games and any of those near losses and exactly describe the reasons and, maybe excuses if you're an Indiana fan or whatever else for why this team lost. What happened? What went wrong? What led to this L? We could go back through and paint that picture, but again, they won each and every one of those games. Maybe it happens again that way, where it's just a team of destiny situation and you just can't even fathom how this team comes away with wins game after game. But either way, that's just what I'm most fascinated in. If Indiana loses, how does it happen? Why does it happen? To whom does it happen against? When does it happen? Where does it happen? Etc. At what point in the schedule does it happen? All of those questions. That's what I'd be most interested in discussing and observing and answering and working through and figuring out this college football season across the entire country. That's what interests me the most. But again, it's just I can't say anything else other than I think that just won't happen until I'm proven otherwise. That's what I had to say about Indiana football. That was a quick 23 minutes. That really went by fast. But that's kind of my biggest take right now on sports, on college football. It's just I'm so fascinated and still just wrapped up in this whole Cignetti story and this whole Indiana football story and all of this compelling, intriguing, fascinating storylines and narratives regarding that program. I'm so lucky to be close to it. I really am. I'm so lucky that I grew up in Indiana, and I'm just, less than a few hours away from Bloomington, and that's the college that I ended up at, and that happens to coincide with this just incredibly fascinating sequence of events down there that ultimately led to a 16 national championship. And again, at least as far as I can tell, is going to lead to another one and another one and another one and another one. And I'll continue to feel that way. They could win 10 in a row, and I'll still think they'll win an 11th until I'm proven otherwise, until it's proven to me and verifiably shown to me that Kurt Cignetti can lose at something in his life from this point forward. It's probably going to happen. That's the biggest thing. It's probably going to happen. And that's what I'm just so fascinated to work through and so fascinated to look at. I'm getting myself worked up. I'm so intrigued by that idea, the thought of Indiana losing, and the fact that that's even something that's coming out of my mouth is something that would be, debated or an interesting conversation, and is obviously very telling in its own right. I should probably stop now on the Indiana football stuff. That's what I have to say about that. I'm really excited about the season. About 2 months away from the first game on September 5th, about 1 month away from fall camp beginning, and really the lead up to the season starting, and all of those storylines and all those tidbits of information really starting to come out of just every campus in America. And then little by little, we'll grow closer to week 0. And then all of a sudden, week 1, when Indiana takes on North Texas. And college football across the board is going to be super fascinating. I'm going to write about it a lot, obviously at the Hoosier Network for Indiana stuff. For the rest of college football and men's college basketball, Garrison's Gradient on Substack is the place to be. It's just my last name, '*S, and then Gradient, obviously 2 words. Go subscribe. We'll have some, on the paid tier, we'll have some college football and men's basketball stuff each and every week. And also you can write in with questions for this show as well. That's another perk of subscribing to Garrison's Gradient. On that paid tier, I recommend you check that out. We'll have so much to discuss this college football season, and I'm just so excited to get going with it. And it all happens so fast. It's just 12, 14, I guess 16 games if you go all the way and win the championship, maybe 17 if you're, one of the teams that doesn't have a first round bye in the college football playoff. And I know there's a couple bye weeks there, but for the most part, it's just about a 20-week run of just, it's fast, it's quick, it goes by blindingly fast, I've heard, and you're just all wrapped up in and immersed in this college football season. And there's so many storylines and a constant news cycle. And then by the time it's over, you just have to look back and reflect for about 6 months about what possibly could have just happened in the college football world. And that's what we're doing. And that's what I just said, my little rant there about Indiana football, is basically just the result of multiple months of just stewing and reflecting and considering and pondering. And all of this is just simmering in kind of the pot of my mind. It's just simmering this college football season. And I'm really excited to have some updates and some new information and some new news and some new discussions and topics and conversations over the course of the season. And that'll all start in about less than a month. Obviously, it's constant, but it'll really come back in full force in about a month. And then the blindingly fast, immersive experience begins in just about 2 months. I'm very, very excited about that. All right, let's move on and talk about the World Cup. Let's talk about international soccer. This is a little bit more for fun, a little bit less educated. I'm kind of just, basically in preparation for this podcast, I just kind of went down an international soccer rabbit hole with the different tournaments and the different, confederations, the different continents, different events, the calendars across the world. And I kind of want to report back on what I found. And obviously all of this just stems from the fact that the World Cup is here, and all of it is World Cup fever related across the board. And the USA lost last night. They're out. They lost 4-1 to Belgium. It was a bad loss. We were probably all fooled. I don't have expert analysis quite in the way that Campbell might. You should check out his Substack, Campbell Manahan on Substack. And obviously he was on this show a couple days ago to talk about the World Cup. He's a great example of someone that does have that actual analysis and knowledge and information on the World Cup. I've kind of been just passively observing it. To be honest with you, I haven't watched that many games. I have, obviously I have a lot going on, but obviously I have plenty of time to watch the World Cup as well. And sometimes, to be real with you, I simply watch the WNBA instead, or a World Cup game is on and I'm not paying full attention to it. I'm doing other things. It's just on in the room. I've kind of had a knack. The nice thing is I've kind of have a knack for just walking by the TV when there's a goal. I'll just, go downstairs, go and eat lunch. Goal happens on the TV. It's like, great, I have that World Cup experience, my little dose of the World Cup today. I know I'm going to regret not fully investing myself in it. It was easier when I was a kid, and, you just come back from summer camp and the World Cup's on all day, and you're just, running around the house screaming about a different team on a different day. Time and time again, 4 years after 4 years, World Cup cycle after World Cup cycle. And this is the one where, instead of in years past where I've been, and I said this on the show with Campbell last week, but instead of just being so passionately interested and excited about the World Cup for a whole year ahead of time, to where I'm like passionately waking up in the morning and looking at like the qualifiers and the African and Asian confederations and like trying to see if Mali advanced or if Mali upset Senegal. And then I just have a year of just misery of waiting in anticipation for the World Cup. And then it happens and it's awesome for a couple months and then it's done and then it's over. This year, it's probably because I have a little bit more going on. I'm a little bit older, right? My life is a little bit more, my schedule's a little bit more filled up than it was 8 years ago. But now I wasn't even thinking about the World Cup until maybe 4 days before. Even when, FS1 and all of these, national sports media outlets, they're all discussing the World Cup. They're all previewing it. People are filling out their brackets. I'm getting them sent to me in group chats. I wasn't into it. I wasn't thinking about it. And then it started with Mexico, South Africa, and obviously the USA played the day after. And I'm really on board. I still haven't been watching games. I still haven't been completely immersed in it as I probably should be for something that's so awesome that happens once every 4 years. But I'm enjoying it from afar. I'm observing it. And last night I had work until 9. I'm obviously in the Eastern time zone, and the game was at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I work at 9. I go home. I go to kind of the downtown area of the town I live in. Got friends there. Everyone's watching it. And the second I got out of the car, that was when Belgium scored the goal number 3. So I was at work, and luckily I was doing something that it was a slower day. Was doing something that was a little bit not very involved, and I just flipped the game on my phone, kind of on like a shelf in front of me, and I saw in that time span the USA equalize at 1-1, and then obviously immediately after Belgium score and make it 2-1. Turned it off at halftime, and then by the time I get out of the car later in the night, it's 3-1 Belgium. I was like, okay, it's over. So I honestly didn't watch really mostly any of the game last night, just because by the time it was 3-1 in the 75th minute or whatever, when I felt like it was over. Didn't even know they scored a 4th goal until it was over. Just hanging out with my friends, had a little picnic in the downtown area, had a good time. And so that's kind of that pretty much explains where I've been at with this World Cup. It's not that I'm against it. It's not that I'm not the Grinch of the World Cup. I've been completely enjoying it and kind of passively observing from afar. But, USA's round of 16 game, maybe the second or third most important game in Team USA history. I just wasn't as locked or as passionately attentive as maybe I should have been. But nonetheless, I think I'm really in on international soccer. And I thought about this a couple days ago. I think the podcast with Campbell really helped spur this and spark this quite a lot. Again, we might have been fooled by having an easier group, us Americans. Paraguay was entering the tournament, as far as I'm aware. Paraguay was 41st in the world. Australia was ranked 27th in the world. Turkey was ranked 22nd in the world. Bosnia and Herzegovina was ranked 64th in the world. And then Belgium was ranked 9th in the world. So we finally played not only a top 10 team, but a top 20 team, which is something that we hadn't seen prior in the tournament. And 4-1 is the result. So maybe we were and I know there's way more intricate analysis you can get into with this entire World Cup run for America, and obviously that game against Belgium most importantly. But to some degree, I think that maybe we were all fooled, and maybe we were we had too lofty of expectations of what could possibly happen, and we were dreaming a little bit too big, which isn't a bad thing. But I think in this World Cup, dreaming a little bit too big, and I think it is a little bit unfair to chastise this American team and say this World Cup was a failure, because as far as I can tell, this team advanced exactly as far as we thought they should advance. Like analytically, I guess you could say, which is obviously a buzzword, or logically. If you beat the teams below you, if you lose, and obviously the loss to Turkey, but that was the backups. It was a game that was essentially meaningless to the standings or to the knockout round seeding, so it didn't matter. But, beat all the teams you're supposed to beat, lost to the teams you were supposed to lose to. You'd like to beat some teams you're not supposed to beat, but nonetheless, this is, in my eyes, not a failure of a World Cup. And so the loss to Belgium is a little bit telling, to say that maybe we were getting a little bit ahead of ourselves when we were saying that this team was going to go win the championship. This team was going to go win the entire World Cup, even though this team was the host. And again, you can look back. I was looking back at the 2018 World Cup. Russia beat Spain and made the quarterfinals when Russia hosted the World Cup. And that's like astonishing to me looking back. And obviously I was, that was 8 years ago now. I was a kid at that time, I think, probably in 6th or 7th grade, just watching these games. I had a great time. I really paid attention to that World Cup, but I just forgot. I must have missed it. I must have not been watching that game. But Russia as the host made the quarterfinals. America as a host made the round of 16, but not much further. And so, it is what it is. But the USA could have played England in the round of 16, could have played France, could have played a multitude of other opponents, could have played Switzerland, I suppose. So there's that. I guess definitely not Switzerland, because Switzerland was the winner of Canada's group, who was a host, and you wouldn't have two hosts play each other that early. I think it'd just be too easy of a path, because obviously America and Canada and probably Mexico are not pot one teams, but they are pot one teams in this World Cup because they're hosting. Either way, America's out, but I'm in on international soccer, and I have this problem in my life where I can't just enjoy something as it's actively happening. I kind of have to prepare for the happiness. I have to like prepare to enjoy it. I prefer an experience like the World Cup if I've had, plenty of lead up and plenty of time to research and just be excited about being excited about it. Just like how in the past I've gotten really excited a year before, and then the World Cup is awesome because I at least know what, I knew that Italy was eliminated from qualification, not this year, but in World Cups past, I knew that Italy was eliminated from World Cup qualification, before the World Cup, because I was actually, kind of at least just on Wikipedia looking at the scores and looking at the brackets and everything like that. Didn't have this experience this time around. So instead of watching attentively Argentina, Egypt, and absorbing as much of the World Cup as I can, I'm just going on rabbit holes on CONCACAF Nations League brackets. But I kind of got myself excited, and I think I'm really in on this. I don't know if I'll watch the friendlies for America. I don't know if I'll watch America soccer specifically anyway, but not the U20 stuff, not the Olympic stuff, but just the World Cup rosters, the World Cup teams. I want to watch those teams as much as I can, because although the World Cup happens every 4 years, I kind of had this realization, which is not a crazy thing to say, but obviously just the realization that, oh, wait, just because that's only once every 4 years, there's still the regional events and the regional tournaments. There's still an international soccer calendar year after year, kind of month after month. And so in the case of the CONCACAF Gold Cup, it really happens every 2 years, but it literally happens every 2 years, but it kind of is really every year and a half, because the Nations League kind of feeds into the Gold Cup, and then the Gold Cup happens, and it's all sort of, it depends on whether or not it's, at the end of the year or the beginning of the year. But pretty much every year and a half, there's going to be a calendar. Every calendar year, there's a Nations League or Gold Cup event. You might go 10 months without it, but every calendar year, there's the Nations League qualifiers or the Gold Cup qualifiers, the Gold Cup final, or whatever else. And so within CONCACAF, right, North America, Central America, the Caribbean, and then obviously you have the Copa America too, which I just found out today involves some CONCACAF teams. You got all 10 CONMEBOL teams, South America, and then you have 6 CONCACAF teams. And I just didn't even know. I'm sure I knew that in the past. I just didn't even know that 16-team tournament involved America and involved Canada and Mexico and all of those teams. Maybe that's a new thing. I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand what's going on at all. That's possible too. But that's fascinating. And those are the kind of events that I'm interested in. It's not even just Team USA, but I want to watch Ghana again. I really do. And I'm sure it wouldn't be on TV, but at least just to watch the scores and scroll on Wikipedia and know what's happening. I think that's something that I might want to just keep in mind. Maybe it'll be only when I'm bored. Maybe it'll be only on, Wednesday nights in football season when there's no action and there's nothing to watch. And we just have to, scroll the depths of sports on Wikipedia and try to find, what Senegal is doing elsewhere in the world. But I think there's always kind of something, at least something going on or something to be excited about. I say all of this within understanding that this is just World Cup fever. That's all this is, because the Nations League, for example, runs from September to March pretty much. I know the beginning portion, the group stage or whatever, is September to November, and then I think they have more. There's like 2 phases. Obviously, you got to like interweave it well with obviously club play. But I know it starts in September, and the finals for that, the Nations League, are going to be in March. And that's pretty much just my busiest time of year, right? The World Cup's great in the summer because there's nothing really else going on, at least I love the WNBA. Some people love the MLB, right? There's stuff going on. There's racing, whatever else. But the World Cup really stands alone and steals the show in the summer. But the Nations League, for example, when, the U.S., and I know that the U.S. is advanced automatically to the quarterfinals of that, so they'll be playing in the spring. But still, like if I were to pay attention to that and I were to want to watch Jamaica versus Honduras, that would be in November in the middle of football season. There's just no time, right? So maybe I could have it on for fun, but I could never like really pay attention to it. And I know that the second football season starts and then we have basketball season. This is all just going to be back of mind and on the back burner in the back of the house of the restaurant of sports in my mind. But I'm interested. It's nice to do a little rabbit hole. What else are we going to do in the summer besides think about football season, rant about Indiana football expectations and just consider what the Gold Cup is potentially going to look like. I'm really intrigued by this Nations League thing. I'm really intrigued by this CONCACAF thing. It's not just North America, but I'm especially interested in that because obviously that pertains to a lot of the teams that I'm most familiar with, just because obviously the U.S. is against these teams the most. So there's the top four teams in the CONCACAF rankings automatically are in the finals of the Nations League, and as far as I can tell, also automatically qualify into the Gold Cup. That right now is Mexico, Canada, the United States, and Panama, and it's probably going to stay that way. I think those were the top four last time the Gold Cup and the Nations League happened, and I think it's going to be like that again because obviously all four of those teams were in the World Cup, and they're not gonna drop below some of those teams that weren't in the World Cup. I know Haiti was in the World Cup too, but they're like eighth in the rankings, and I mean you know what I mean. Like Costa Rica wasn't in the World Cup, they're not going to jump a team that is in the World Cup. As far as I can tell, it looks like those teams are going to be the same way. So that makes the Nations League in the fall pretty much irrelevant for Team USA. And if you don't care, you don't care. But I think I might kind of care. And then you have League A, League B, League C. League A has 16 teams. Those four automatically move on to the quarterfinals. Those 12 play in two groups of six. They do the Swiss style within those groups. I think they play 4 games. And the Swiss style is just awesome. It's used in esports a lot. When I used to have a pretty thorough and long esports phase when I was younger, I experienced a lot of Swiss, and I really fell in love with it. It's best when there's 16 teams, and you play in between 3 and 5 games, and you play a different opponent. But only your first matchup is set when you enter the tournament. You play that game, and then all the teams that are 1-0 are like randomly, or whether it's seeded by goal differential, they all play each other, and all the teams that are 0-1 play each other, and you play against teams that have the same record as you. And then if you win 3 games, you advance. If you lose 3 games, you're out. And by the end of the 5 rounds of Swiss, you'll have 2 teams that are 3-0, 3 that are 3-1, and 3 that are 3-2, if I remember correctly. That's correct. And then obviously 3 that are 2-3, 3 that are 1-3, and then 2 that are 0-3. And that's 8 on each side. So 8 are eliminated, 8 advance to the knockout stage, and you play from there. And I don't know, that's not exactly how it works in this. Obviously, there's 6 teams, and you're playing 4 games, but still, it's Swiss, which is a format that I love. And then you make it through the quarterfinals, the top 2 in those groups, you make it through, and then you play those teams that were automatically in the quarterfinals, and they do a little, just single elimination playoff for the Nations League Championship. And there's a million different ways to qualify for the Gold Cup, and the Nations League is a great way to either automatically qualify or at least advance yourself to prelims for the Gold Cup, and then you can qualify for the Gold Cup that way. But it's all kind of one long event, one long tournament, and I love it. I'm really interested in it, and I think I'm at least going to pay attention. I'm at least going to check the scores on Wikipedia by the time we get to November, October, November. I just said November already. I tried to say the months in order and started with November, went back to October. That was weird. But nonetheless, throughout the winter, throughout the fall, throughout the spring, I think I'm going to be interested. And by the time the USA is playing a Nations League semifinal game in April or whatever, or March, and March Madness is happening, so I probably won't watch it. But if it's on a day where there is no March Madness, maybe that's what I'm doing. Maybe that's what I'm going to be into, is the Nations League. And I don't know, I'm interested. And again, that's not all it is. I'm sure that those are the only matchups that would really be on TV in America, is obviously the Team USA ones, and maybe Mexico and Canada and some of those other stronger teams as well. So it's not like I could watch Japan in the Asian Cup Championships, whatever they call that. I think the confederation is called the AFC over there in Asia, if I remember correctly, and then CAF in Africa, and then CONCACAF in North America. This is all just unearthed memories from when I was like 7 years old. But nonetheless, that's what I'm interested in. It's not just that. I'll be interested in it across the world. You got the Euros, which are obviously kind of a big deal, and I think people actually kind of care about that in America, and I think they are actually on TV, so that'll be fun. I have some neighbors that are Serbian who I had a great time with in the World Cup, I think in 2018 when Serbia made it, and I don't think they've made it since. And so I've missed Serbia. I've missed that experience of rooting for Serbia with my neighbors, and maybe that's what can happen for me in the Euros. Just little experiences like that. And it really solves the scrambled soccer problem. What I mean by that is, like, in America, the MLS is not a huge deal, and even if it is in places where the MLS is actually happening, I live in Indianapolis, and there's no MLS team here. Now, we have the Indy 11, the USL, and if they instituted promotion and relegation, I think I would really be into the Indy 11, but that's just not how it works. It's just a full minor league, and so I care about them about as much as I would any other minor league team. Or it's not really a minor league, but it's not the MLS, it's the USL, and so it's just not the same. You can't get into it in the same way. And obviously in Europe, I'm just not the type of person to pick a Premier League team. I'm not a real fan. I'm not from London, so I'm not going to cheer for a team in London or anything like that. It's hard for me to fake fandom. And I know for some of those people it's not fake because they picked their team when they were 5, but it's just tricky for me. It's hard for me to do that. It's during football season on Sundays. It doesn't work out. And even still, it's just in my opinion, just root for the MLS. Do whatever you want. It's your life, not mine. But for me, I'd rather just pick an MLS team than pick a team in England or in Spain or wherever else, unless you're, like a Ronaldo fan or a fan of a specific player, or you're, Portuguese and you love Ronaldo and you want to follow him in his club teams, whatever. For me, though, I'd rather just pick an MLS team. And I'm the type of person where I don't pick teams. I don't follow teams anymore. Maybe I did when I was a kid, but I don't follow teams that are outside of my state, right? I'm an indie guy. The Pacers, the Fever. I pay way more attention to the WNBA than I ever would the MLB, partially because I love basketball more, and also because there's just no MLB team here, right? I'm sure I would be way more into it if I had a team I was a fan of and interested in. And I know there's minor league teams around, but it's just different. And so I think the international soccer stuff really solves this problem, because although there's the U20 and the U17 and whatever else, whoever plays in the World Cup, I think it's U20, and you can have a couple older players, but like maybe 3. But it's still not the same. I want the World Cup teams as World Cup rosters, the true best players in every nation, the best rosters you can assemble in every country on earth. Put them all together, and over the course of time, over the course of multiple years, there's plenty of matchups, there's plenty of tournaments, etc. That's what I'm interested in. That's what I want to watch. I think that's what I want to pay attention to. And maybe I'll just completely forget about that the second we hit August. The second the calendar flips to August, I'm going to completely forget about that. The second the World Cup ends, I'm going to completely forget about that for 4 years, and it's going to be the same story of my entire life, where then the World Cup comes around, and I'm really excited about it. I'm really into it. I promise myself I'm going to pay attention to international soccer, and then I'm going to stop again for 4 years. That's probably just going to be the story of my life with soccer over the course of time. Every 4 years, it's this cycle, just like it is for the general public. But for the moment, I have this World Cup fever. I did the little Nations League Gold Cup CONCACAF rabbit hole, and it's not on my calendar, but it's on my mental calendar. I'll remember when we hit November, I think, that this stuff is happening, and I'll be excited to pay attention to it. And maybe I get really into it and end up talking about it on the podcast or something like that, or writing about it, or just interest in international soccer. It's a nice, in America at least, it's kind of a niche community of people that are really into that. And maybe I could be even more niche and be the person that's really into the Africa World Cup qualifiers while they're happening, not looking back once the World Cup's already started. Who knows? I just know I'm into it. I'm in on international soccer. In or out, I'm in. USA's out of the World Cup, but I'm in on international soccer. That's my take on that at this time, in the middle of the World Cup knockout rounds. Obviously, the perfect time for anyone to decide that they're in on international soccer. All right, that's what I have to say about that. I have one more topic I want to discuss. This one's a little bit more unnecessary. I'm just kind of speaking out loud. I normally don't do this. I like to, in general, in sports media in my life, I like to have everything that I focus on and everything that I produce content on, it's related to something actively happening. It's related to a game, whether or not it's recapping a game, analyzing a game, previewing a game. I care the most. I pretty much only care about the process to winning a championship, the process to crowning a champion, most importantly, over the course of an entire league. I've cared more. Once I started writing, I became more appreciative of the human story side of it. And, obviously these players are people. You don't necessarily see them that way as a kid when you're just watching on TV. But the human story aspect, the humanness of sports is something that I've appreciated more as I've started writing. And some of my favorite pieces are on that topic, or on, in that category of just, human stories. The Tyler Morris story I wrote for the Hoosier Network, that's my most recent football story from about a month ago now. That's one of those that I just love. I really worked hard on it. My editor, Alex McCarthy at the Hoosier Network, helped out an insurmountable amount with that. And I love it. It's a story about someone I've never met, someone I've never talked to, but I felt like I constructed it pretty well. And that's become very rewarding and fulfilling for me. But other than that, what I care about pretty much exclusively is the process to winning a championship. So I really struggle with, in the off season here in July, when people are saying, just making up all these ridiculous, like the whole GOAT debate. You can talk about it, but I think I'll sit that one out, right? It just doesn't matter to me whether or not LeBron James or Michael Jordan is the best player of all time. Maybe it should. Maybe I think I'm probably the problem. Maybe I'm in the wrong with that. But it just doesn't matter to me whether or not Indiana's 2026 championship is more impressive than the LSU championship. It's just it's they're two separate seasons. It's two separate decades, and depending on how you look at it, it just doesn't matter to me. I only care about the process to winning a championship, reflecting on that previous process of winning a championship, and then maybe looking ahead to the next championship, which is what we did with Indiana and college football a little bit earlier on in the show. The second segment was a little bit more fun, but for the most part, like I'm interested in the process of crowning a champion. I think that's why I'm in on sports so much since I was a kid. That's kind of what I've described it. When people ask me why I love sports, I'm like, I don't really know, but I think it has something to do with just that fascination with the process to winning a championship. This segment, though, is completely unnecessary and falls into the category that I previously mentioned, where I'm just I have an opinion and I want to say it, and there's no other time to say it than July. I think Mickey Mouse championships just don't exist. I don't think they're real. I just don't think it's a real thing. I really don't. I'm from Indiana. You can see the Pacers mug right here on my wall, or on my shelf, I suppose, in the backgrounds. I'm a Pacers fan, right? I'm a Fever fan. I'm a Colts fan. I grew up really just a Colts fan in terms of local Indianapolis professional sports, because you know how it is. You just like the teams that your parents like. It never really was, my parents were never really in on the NBA. They were never really paying attention to it. And then as I grew older, really with the Pacers finals run, obviously that was something that I tuned into and kind of grew an appreciation for that team. I started watching the Pacers that season when they went to France and they played the Spurs twice. It was just on TV. It was on ESPN, and I could actually watch it. And I remember I was watching one of those games in Paris in a coffee shop because it was earlier in the day. And I think they lost that game, one of them. Whichever one they lost, I was watching. And that's when I started watching that team, and I was, for all intents and purposes, one of those Indianapolis bandwagon fans. I wasn't that loud about it. I wasn't acting like I was a fan forever. And I was around people who were true fans forever. And so I decided when they lost to the Thunder that I was going to watch every Fever game, and that I was going to completely, I was going to invest myself into Indianapolis sports. Just, this is my city. I got to cheer for these teams. I got to watch all these games. I watched every Fever game that summer and fall. I watched obviously every Colts game, and then I tried to watch every Pacers game, and then basically didn't want to pay for FanDuel Sports Network, and also the season derailed itself, and so that kind of fell through. But still, I'm an Indianapolis sports guy. And even within that, so there's the Knicks won the NBA championship this past season, right? And most people are just celebrating or congratulating the Knicks for winning the championship. But where I am in Indianapolis, there's kind of a counterculture of, but wait, just the idea of, wait a second, the Knicks didn't have to play the Pacers, right? The team that knocked them out of the playoffs the 2 previous years, the Knicks didn't have to play. They just had to skip that team and go win the championship. And there's some claims that it's a Mickey Mouse championship, right, or an illegitimate ring because the Knicks didn't have to play the Pacers, which bothers me. And I actually do disagree with that, even though, and that's why I mentioned the fact that I'm kind of an Indianapolis sports fan, I'm a Pacers fan, right? Even though I should fit into the category of people that are trying to discredit the Knicks championship. I struggle with that idea, that thought pattern, that worldview, that outlook. I disagree. I think I disagree. I don't think Mickey Mouse championships exist. And there's 2 categories of Mickey Mouse championships. One, people called the Lakers winning in the NBA bubble during COVID a Mickey Mouse championship, or the Dodgers winning during COVID a Mickey Mouse championship because the season was shortened by so many games. And there's more like that, where, sure, the circumstances were different than they usually are, but those circumstances apply to everyone, right? Everyone in the NBA had to play in the bubble. That obviously made it to that portion of the season. Everyone in the expanded MLB playoffs had to play under those circumstances, right, with masks, with all of that. COVID is a great breeding ground for Mickey Mouse championship claims. But my counterpoint to that, which I think is very simple, is just that, okay, sure, the Lakers won in the bubble when they were no real road fans, but also everyone had to play in those conditions. Nobody had home fans, nobody had road fans, and the Lakers handled that situation the best, considering the players they obviously had on the roster. They won that championship, and to me, that's a super legitimate, super valid championship win for LeBron and everyone else that was on that team. The other category of Mickey Mouse championships, and the ones that I think are a little bit more generally regarded to be Mickey Mouse rings, are when maybe the best team in the league has some injuries, right, and ends up not being at full strength when they face the team that ends up winning the championship. or just those teams have a fluke loss, or there's a questionable officiating call or whatever, and they don't quite make it through. And that's what this applies to with the Knicks and this kind of Indianapolis. I don't know how much of a storyline this is nationally, but I know there's a real counterculture in Indiana of this is a Mickey Mouse championship. This isn't real for the Knicks. This isn't as impressive as they're acting like it is because they didn't have to play the Pacers. And there's also that also pairs with kind of the fury of knowing that Indiana sports and the Pacers, who were just a game away from winning a championship of their own, are largely completely undiscussed and off the radar in the national media. So those two forces combine to create kind of that fire against the Knicks or whoever else. And so my argument against that, and it's correct, right? The Knicks lost to the Pacers last season. They didn't have to avenge the Pacers, and the Pacers didn't lose in the playoffs. They had a very bad season, but in part because they were very injured, and obviously, first and foremost, Tyrese Halliburton missed the entire year. That is a very extreme example of a team avoiding something, right? Due to forces outside of their control, the Knicks didn't have to play the Pacers. They could just avoid the Pacers. They could just go on and win a championship without ever thinking about the Pacers in the postseason. And that was, for all intents and purposes, lucky for the Knicks. But that kind of stuff, even though it may not be that extreme every single season, that kind of thing happens every single year. There's always a team that maybe could have been capable of beating the champions. There's almost always a team that could have been capable of beating the champions and just wasn't at full strength, or was knocked out too early, or there was an officiating, the ball bounced the wrong way, something lucky, right? That makes every champion effectively lucky, where there's some lucky break happen to allow that champion to ultimately become the champion. And obviously, the Knicks won the championship for a million different reasons, and the vast majority of those reasons have to do with the Knicks just being awesome, whether it's roster construction, front office decisions, coaching decisions, the players just being awesome on the court, the fans, whatever else. There are so many reasons why, and they're almost all of them, the majority of them, I should say, have to do with the Knicks being awesome. One of them is, sure, maybe that the Pacers weren't in the postseason and didn't have the opportunity to knock out the Knicks again, but either way, this is the truth, right? The Knicks were awesome. They deserve this championship, and I would say that this stuff happens every single year, and that no matter what, it's really, really hard to win a championship. Even if you play the 8 seed, the 5 seed, and then the 7 seed, and then another 8 seed en route to the title, and even if there were a million just Goliaths and all of their best players had injuries, that kind of stuff happens every year. And it's not the Knicks' fault. It's not New York's fault that the Pacers weren't at full strength and weren't in the postseason and weren't there to knock out the Knicks. Now, it's not the Pacers' fault that they weren't there either. It's not Indiana's fault that the Pacers weren't in the postseason and didn't have the possibility of potentially knocking off the Knicks or anyone else. And on the flip side, it's not New York's fault either, right? It's unlucky, or it is lucky in the case of the Knicks, right? It's external forces, but those external forces are in play every single season. You could have a perfect year, have the perfect playoff run, just like the Pacers, and still your best player could get injured after starting off with a really great game on the road in Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and you can lose that NBA Finals, you can lose that championship, and it's not the Pacers' fault that happens, right? And I don't know exactly what sequence of events led up to that injury, but obviously it's not Tyrese Halliburton's fault that he got hurt. It's not the Pacers' fault that their best player found his way injured. But still, did everything right, did almost everything you could possibly do, and still, there's no championship. There's no ring to show for it. And that's super painful, but that's just kind of, in many ways, the way it goes. And in the same way on the other side, when you have the opportunity to take advantage and win a championship like the Knicks did, where the Pacers are gone, the Pacers are missing, we got to go win a championship. They did that. They did everything right. They won the championship. They won it in 5 games against the Spurs and the player who might end up being the best player in the world if he, reaches his true potential, I suppose you could say, compared to LeBron and Jordan and all of those players over the course of his entire career. But I will always have, unless you cheated, I will always have respect for someone who wins a championship at any level, in any sport, in any way. The Knicks winning a championship, even though the Pacers weren't there, and that's kind of a weak example, but nonetheless, the Knicks winning a championship, I will always have respect for that happening, right? The Lakers won the championship in the bubble. There weren't any home fans or road fans to be passionate and loud and energetic in that stadium, around that basketball court, right? But I still will look at that season and say, okay, the front office was trying to construct a roster that's capable of winning an NBA championship. The head coaches were trying to, figure out the schemes and strategies to win an NBA championship. And then the players were trying to play good enough basketball to win an NBA championship. And all of those boxes were checked. They all did that. And the Lakers were champions that year. And COVID or not, That's super impressive, and I respect that because ultimately, the only goal in this whole, at least in theory, the only goal in this whole sports world is to win a championship, and actually doing that, regardless of whether or not it's easy or easier than in other years, or if it's harder than usual, or if it was or wasn't, your fault that something happens or that something went wrong. If you win a championship, you've achieved that goal, and that's all it is. And they're not all created equal in the sense that they're not all as easy or as difficult as other teams' championships would be. But at the end of the day, when the name goes on the plaque and when the name goes on the trophy, right? And at the end of the day, when you scroll down the history of the NBA or the NFL or whatever else, and you look at all the champions, all of those names appear in equal size font, right? In an equal font. They all appear the same. And for the fans, it matters the same amount, the same awesome, amazing amounts each and every time when a championship is won. Obviously, for teams that have had long droughts, it's a little bit different for those fan bases, but nonetheless, the championship still means as much in 2026 as it did in 25 and as much as it will in 2027. Even though it's more difficult one year or easier in another, I still have full respect for the front offices, the teams, the coaching staffs, the players that make it happen. Again, it's not their fault it was easier. It's not New York's fault that Indiana wasn't there. It wasn't Indiana's fault either. It was nobody's fault. It's just the way it is. And when you see the cards that are laid out in front of you, when you see the way it is, and you still find a way, whether it's for you or against you, to battle through that and go win a championship, I have ultimate respect for those teams completely, because that's the only goal, is to win a championship. And if it's easier, if it's more difficult, it doesn't matter. The goal is to win a championship, and that's what the Knicks did. That's what the Lakers did in 2020, the Dodgers in 2020 as well, all of those teams. That makes, by the way, the most heartbreaking, and for the Pacers, for example, did everything right, probably, definitely, at least would have been in the mix to win that championship if that Game 7 had played out with Tyrese Haliburton on the court. You do everything right. You do everything you can. The Bengals are like that too from a few years ago. Not a perfect team, but made the Super Bowl and lost by one possession to the Rams and just have never gotten close again. That's at least to this point. That is, or I shouldn't say haven't gotten close, but at least haven't gotten back to the Super Bowl. Haven't been an AFC champion again since then. That just kills me. It really pains me to see that. And I always feel so bad for those teams. And I think about them all the time. Just when I let my mind wander, I'm thinking about those teams that were almost there. The 49ers are I shouldn't even say the Bengals. The 49ers are the best example. Make the Super Bowl multiple times, send it to overtime, right? And just both times it's the Chiefs, and the Chiefs stop you. And the 49ers might not win a Super Bowl in this generation because they couldn't get it done at that time. And that's horrifying. That's heartbreaking, especially in those cases. For the most part, the Chiefs just won the game, but obviously there are some forces outside of their control. And that's what I mean. It happens every year. It happens all the time. In every game, there's forces outside of your control. The officials, the fans, the weather, whatever it may be. But for that reason, and in part due to the randomness, and in part due to how truly difficult it already is to win a championship, and then there's the chance that just every force in the universe is against you to winning that championship. No matter who wins the championship, no matter how many, as long as they weren't cheating, as long as there were, nothing truly nefarious in play. There was nothing truly nefarious in play. No matter how many forces were for or against a certain team, if they win a championship, I'm like, great. They accomplished the goal. They did what they were trying to do. They did everything that was asked of them, and I see no reason to criticize or discredit or bring down that title. Again, even if the Pacers weren't there to stop the Knicks, even if there were no road fans to cheer against the Lakers, whatever the case may be. That's my stance on Mickey Mouse championships. I just think they aren't real. And people will talk about that, and again, you can talk about whatever you want. You can have whatever opinion you want. That's just my opinion. And when people start talking about Mickey Mouse championships, I kind of check out of the conversation. I'm not really interested just because I disagree. That's just not a conversation I want to traffic in. The World Cup and international soccer is a conversation I want to traffic in, and I want to become more informed and more knowledgeable over the course of time with the Nations League, the Gold Cup, whatever else, and then Indiana football. I'm totally okay to traffic in the conversations about Indiana football and that team potentially taking a step back in 2026 is totally reasonable, and I'm recognizing that you're probably right. But I'm then separately saying that I just can't ever say anything out loud or pick against this Indiana team until it actually happens, until this team actually loses. And as far as I can tell, it's never going to happen. Obviously, realistically, for having a real conversation, it probably will. And I'm so transfixed and fascinated and compelled by that possibility and that future event, that potential future event. If it happens, I'd love to know when, where, why, how, to whom, what possibly went wrong. That's what I want to discuss when we get to that point, if we get to that point in the history of the future. That's what we talked about in this episode of the Andrew Garrison Show. Thank you so much for paying attention. Thank you so much for tuning in. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, I appreciate you a great deal for being here. We'll be back next week with another episode. Who knows what we'll talk about then? Maybe some more World Cup stuff, maybe some WNBA, maybe some more college football, college basketball, whatever the case may be. Appreciate you for being here. I hope you return next week for the next episode of the Andrew Garrison Show. I've got some exciting stuff coming. Again, football season's on the way. We got some Hoosier Network projects working. Big Ten Media Days are coming up as well very, very soon. Just Media Days in general for college football are coming up very, very soon. And that's going to spark a lot of conversations. So a lot of stuff there. Some other podcast stuff I'm excited to announce a little bit later on in the summer. And again, just plenty to be excited about. So go check out the City League podcast over the City League YouTube channel. That's what I'm doing this summer. Keep an eye out for those Hoosier Network stories. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. Subscribe to the show on YouTube or Spotify, however you might be listening, or both. And follow along with my stuff because it's really going to ramp up in the fall and just carry through the winter and the spring and forever and ever after that. So very exciting times here it's a very exciting period of Andrew Garrison history in my life. And I would hope you join to ride along that wave with me. Thank you so much for watching or listening to the Andrew Garrison Show. I will talk to you all again next time.